I cursed it. I'm sorry. This is my bad. My bad. I'm sorry. Lorelei. The episode that has nothing to do with me, I swear, it's a female version of me. Actually, funny fact, if you ever try to do, at least when I'm doing the voice to text on my phone, it always translates Laura as Laurel. So it's something I need to get off my chest, apparently. Margaret Arman wrote this episode, and she was one of the season 3 writers. I talked about her briefly, I'm pretty sure, in the TOS stuff. She was brought in kind of late and was intended to replace Arthur Singer as main story editor, but instead kind of, season 4 didn't happen. So it seemed logical that she'd be brought in for, TAS, since they're continuing. She was also in the forefront of their minds when it came to Phase 2, and she actually wrote an episode for Phase 2 when it came to that. And, for the first time, she will write 2 episodes of TAS, so that's nice. So, guess how many cast members are on this episode? I'm just going to tell you, it's 7. Nichelle Nichols plays 4, Majel Barrett plays 2, James Doohan plays 2. How exactly does a ship get taken at a precise time every 27.xxxx years? That's really precise. Is there always a ship? Did it happen the first time and then people just got curious? I mean, that makes sense, actually, now that I'm saying that out loud, because that's exactly why the Enterprise is here. People disappear around here every 27 years. I wonder what's And we can finally definitively say that Kirk is not a geek. Why? Well, if he had played Dungeons & Dragons, he would know that when you hear a random strange song come over the comms, you should probably not listen to it. Just turn off the speakers. Shoot the speakers if you need to. Okay, you've never played D&D, fine. You ever heard of the Sirens? No? Okay, that's cool. Very small point. Probably one of the only cool points of the whole episode is the fact that Kirk says, we need to get there right now. Warp 7. He doesn't say it like that. He's actually more understated. He just says, yes, there's a call coming from this place. Set a course, Warp 7. Remember, Warp 8 is their cap, and Warp 7, as we've discussed previously, is still very hard on the engines, so he still insists on getting there pronto. I don't have another way to ask this. What would happen to a male who isn't straight? Would this mind-controlling thing still affect them? That would be interesting, wouldn't it? I mean, it said it has nothing. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with any kind of gender thing, or I don't know what the word to use here. I was informed recently that saying preference was actually a negative thing, so I don't even know what to call it anymore. But you know what I mean? Like, whatever you're into doesn't seem to have any impact on that. It's only whether you are biologically male. So I suppose it would affect someone like Sulu just as much as it would anyone else. But it does actually make me wonder, would he see men? Because it's a mind-affecting thing, right? And would he get there and be like, would that affect it at all? I'm actually weirdly curious about this. Of course, the episode couldn't possibly address anything like that, so that's just whatever. This is also a good time to complain about something else. The siren call itself. Now, I'm gonna stop there, but it plays for several minutes solid. It actually started hurting my head. And I got to the point where all right, I'm going to take my headphones out and just watch the subtitles if this doesn't shut up. Because I already have the development of a headache, and I don't need it to get worse, Come on, episode, work with me here. So, they get down there. It's like, all right, the males occupy another compound. Okay. So they put them over there, and they put the headbands on them, and they're getting older! Again. What's actually funny about that is in one of the old Trek things, and I mean like before TNG era or like right in early TNG era, there was a series of Trek maps which are no longer even close to canon, or continuity, that showed that this episode and that one actually occurred in right next to each other. So it's possible the aging thing that affects both of them was actually the same thing. So that would make a degree of sense, if not for the fact that this is the distant corners of space that we have no idea what's over here, and certainly haven't already had a settlement set here where we've already seen this phenomena happen, and it doesn't quite fit, is what I'm trying to say, as per usual with Star Trek. Almost like the straight male thing earlier. It doesn't fit. I want you, but it doesn't fit. So I'm all for Uhura getting in command. It was apparently something that was pushed for by several people, including obviously Nichols herself. But did you have to give her this episode? I'm reminded of that concept that I can never think of the name of. It's where someone ensures failure to prove themselves right. It comes up a lot in gaming. Nobody likes X type of game. Okay, fine. We'll allow you to make X type of game, but we won't give you funding, and we won't give you support, and we won't give you infrastructure, and we won't market it at all. Hey, it failed. I guess we were right. It feels like that's kind of what's going on here. I don't know if it's intentionally or not, but it's like, yeah, sure, we'll give Uhura command. Oh, it's a crap episode. Okay, whatever. So let's really go through this. I have my notes here. Let's talk about the pacing and tempo of this episode. And I got something. I'm digging for stuff to talk about in a threat episode when I have to talk about tempo and pacing, but here we are. So, Uhura says she will take full command of the episode and take full responsibility. Actually, she doesn't get to that. Sorry. So, first she says, I must take command of the Enterprise. Okay. Then we cut to the Enterprise crew down below being tossed around like dolls, rag dolls specifically, which, okay, might be terrifying, except it looks hysterical, and then it is immediately followed by Scotty singing, actually pretty decently. James Doohan does a decent job with it, but singing as the ship very slowly circles the planet. What? This then is followed by the scene I referenced earlier, where Uhura's like, I am taking command and I'll take full responsibility. Like it's a big dramatic moment. Then she sits on her ass and does nothing while the crew down below, the main three, of course, rush and have this big, incredible action sequence. I'm sorry. I know. The animation's crap, but wow. Okay. It's not even the silhouettes thing. That actually doesn't bother me all that much. That's just a cost-saving feature. But there's a storyboarding problem with the action sequence where it legitimately doesn't make perfect sense. And it looks like things that aren't happening are happening as they're showing it because they don't know how to show the stills in the right order. Like, I'm actually curious if there was a screw-up when it comes to this episode. Then they get in the urn. Come back to that in a minute. And this then cuts to after this breakneck scene, this cuts to a very long, dry exposition thing where they very banally lay out all the things that we've all figured out already. Then Spock crawls in and manages to call Uhura for help. Now, I want to remind you that Uhura has taken command and has been doing nothing this whole time until Spock says, hey, you should come down with an all-female team. And she comes down on the advice of Spock. Did she need Spock in that equation? I feel like Uhura could have pieced together what's needed here without that an unnecessary step. In fact, actually, if I'm being blunt, the threat of the episode seems so banal that it shouldn't have even been a threat episode because it doesn't affect the women. And the women still have things like transporters and phasers and a freaking starship. So there's no threat. There's no danger. Oh no, the guys are disabled. We only have half the crew left. Really? And remember, these people down below, they don't have anything. All they have is their song powers and their the beacon, the siren call. That's it. That's all they got. So where's the threat? Maybe it's a dilemma? No. Maybe it's a mystery? No. Maybe it's a thinker or a message or anything else it could be? No. This is a waste of time, is what it is. And I apologize for wasting your time as well. But this is my job. So Spock then uses straight up telepathy because heaven forbid that Nurse Chapel or Uhura who have access to the ship, I want to keep reminding you, and tricorders and all sorts of other wonderful things, need Spock to suddenly and magically develop telepathy. I know he had it in TOS as well, in order to call them to where he is, and then he needs to tell them the solution to fix everything. I do like the Earn threat. One of the only... There's 3 decent parts about this episode. I already mentioned 2. One is Uhura taking command, which they do nothing with, but is at least an idea. We already talked about the first one, which is the Warp 7 thing, and this is the third thing. This is one of those mundane threats, and I've always found something really enjoyable about mundane threats. You know, there's something exciting about a Tyrannosaurus Rex charging down at you, but there's something much more beautifully horrific about being trapped in a bowl, basically, in the urn. Imagine you're in a pool that hasn't been filled and it starts raining, and you're too weak to get out, like you've broken your leg or something, and you're struggling to manage to get out in time. Because, I mean, the urn is a better situation, because the idea here is that eventually they would probably sink down and drown, or otherwise, you know, be injured in the process before the water filled up enough that they were able to be poured out. And even if they were poured out, that's like 10, 15 feet in the air. That's a hell of a drop. So it's not a lethal threat per se, but it is still definitely a danger. And it's so beautifully mundane. It's one of the only interesting ideas the episode has. And I do like how Uhura actually is able to figure out where it is by herself without someone showing. I was half expecting Bones to be like, "We're in the urn." And just somehow Bones develops telepathy. So then we cut to the part of the episode that really loses me. Because so far this episode has just been bad. What pushes us down to worse is, oh, poor us. We've been stuck here for decades. And we can't leave. It's this unnightmarish hell. And we can't even have children. And that's why we've been luring people here deliberately and eating them for decades. Not a lot of sympathy, regardless of your gender. By the way, I'd love to see how this works with the Klingons and the Romulans, which they state flat out has actually happened. Nom, nom, nom. So then they imply that they're going to get him a ship and get them the hell out of Dodge. And they can move on. Yay, threat defeated, victory. And thank God this will never come up again in TNG, where they decide to fix having been aged artificially with the transporter. Or on Voyager, where they have an episode where a siren planet calls to... Yeah. You might be thinking, why isn't this Lamentation? As a fresh reminder, my rules on Lamentations have kind of been codified going through Enterprise and TOS. I like to call it Lamentation 1 off, 2 off, 3 off. This is more like a 2 off, because it isn't terrible. It's worse. It's worse. So we got bad, worse, terrible, right? That's 1 off, 2 off, 3 off in reverse order. But for it to be Lamentation, there needs to be that extra oomph. There needs to be one last little that pushes it. And this episode doesn't have that, in my opinion. In fact, I don't even think it's terrible, because there are some decent elements and there's some concepts that they could do something with that they just don't. Instead, this is merely a awful episode. That's all. It's merely awful. But as usual, I don't like to criticize without critiquing. But before I say anything, what would you do with this episode? Imagine you are you're shackled to the same core concept. Sirens. Space sirens. So what do you do with it? The first thing I would do is make it affect people regardless of gender. And I would restructure it a little bit so that Uhura... let's say by virtue of recognizing the patterns in the song, realizes what it is the first. And so she's the one who recommends dealing with it. But by the time she's figured this out, it's already got its hooks in everyone else. Then restructure the episode to be a little bit of, well, frankly, kind of the Uhura versus the possessed crew thing. Just a little bit. Don't make that the whole episode, but make that at least like the first act threat. As she's trying to get away and she's got something that she has developed or worked on in order to get rid of the song, get rid of the sound, and she tries to make it so that it gets rid of it for the rest of the ship. She succeeds, but by the time she has done so, several crew members have already beamed down. And because this is TOS era, it will naturally be the big 3. So, the big three have already beamed down, and now the dilemma is trying to save them. The problem they're having isn't then saving them, because they beam down and they find the women, and the women are like, oh, whoa, poor's us. And Uhura, rather than sympathizing, says, "You what?" And straight up calls them out on it. This leads to them getting defensive and arguing that they had to survive, and it's their right to survive, even if it means killing another. This then leaves us with an interesting dilemma. In the face of this unrepentance, do we decide to reach out a hand to these people? Because by this point, the threat has actually been solved. This would then, if you're paying attention, shift this from a threat episode to a dilemma episode. And now that they've cut off the source of the problem, they have to decide how they're dealing with them. I'm not going to say how I would end that. I'd have to think about that a little bit longer and probably workshop it. But this brings me to my second question. Given the script I just handed you, how would you end it? What would you do with that premise? Looking forward to your comments. Certainly a lot more than I was this episode. Sorry about the neighbors. There's some noise. I might even have to chop off recording for a bit because of the noise problem, so I do apologize for that. But I hope you've enjoyed regardless, and I'll see you next time.